Welcome to Pumping Python. My name is Jacob Itegboje, and this is how to handle exceptions in programs, which is a continuation of how to test that an exception is raised. Time to write some code. We'll open up the terminal, then go back to the last test. Enter twice after raise exception. Backspace. DEF test underscore catching underscore exceptions underscore W underscore messages parentheses self a colon at the end. Enter after the colon source dot exceptions dot raise underscore exception parentheses. The terminal shows attribute error. Module source dot exceptions has no attribute raise exception. I'll come here to exceptions.py, hit enter 3 times after the return statement, add raise underscore exception. The terminal shows name error. Name raise exception is not defined. Come back here, equal sign none to define it. This gives me type error. Non-type object is not callable. DEF raise exception parentheses colon enter return remove the equal sign none. And the test passes. I want this function to raise an exception when it is called. Come back here to the test, enter before the line, add with self.assertRaises parentheses exception colon at the end. Come down to the next line and with control or command right square bracket move it to the right. The terminal shows assertion error, exception not raised. Come here to the return statement, change that to say raise exception. And the test passes. I can be more specific when handling exceptions in tests by using the assertRaisesRegex method from the unit test or test case class. It checks that the code within the context raises the exception it is given with the message it is given. It uses regular expressions for this. I'll change the assertRaises here to say assertRaisesRegex. Then enter to the left of exception, enter to the right, backspace. Come after exception, quotes, boom, with an exclamation mark. The terminal shows assertion error. Boom does not match the empty quotes. Come here to raise exception, parentheses at the end of the line, quotes, boom, exclamation mark. And the test passes. Time to add an exception handler to the program. I'll come here to the test, enter twice after the last one, backspace twice. DEF, test underscore catching underscore failure, parentheses self, colon at the end. Enter after the colon, self.assert equal. Parentheses enter source.exceptions dot an underscore exception underscore handler. parentheses, enter source.exceptions.raise underscore exception as input to this function. Come after the closing parentheses, enter quotes failed as my expectation. The terminal shows attribute error. Module source.exceptions has no attribute and exception handler. I'll come back here to exceptions.py, hit enter 3 times after the boom, and underscore exception underscore handler. The terminal shows name error. Name and exception handler is not defined. Equal sign none to define it. This gives me type error. Non-type object is not callable. DEF and exception handler parentheses colon enter return remove the equal sign none. Still type error, this time a different message. An exception handler takes 0 positional arguments, but 1 was given. I'll make the function take input. In the parentheses, add argument. Now the terminal shows assertion error. None is not equal to failed. I'll make a copy of the string, use it to replace none in that return statement. And the test passes. I want the exception handler to process its input. If it encounters an exception, it should return failed. If it does not, it should return succeeded. I'll add a test for this. Enter twice after the closing parentheses, backspace, def test underscore catching underscore success, parentheses self, a colon at the end. Enter after the colon, self.assert equal. Parentheses, enter source.exceptions dot and underscore exception underscore handler. Parentheses, enter. As input this time, it will be source.exceptions.does underscore not underscore raise underscore exception. The terminal shows attribute error. Module source.exceptions has no attribute does not raise exception. Come here, hit enter 3 times after the boom, add does underscore not underscore raise underscore exception. The terminal shows name error. Name does not raise exception is not defined. Equal sign none to define it. I forgot to add the second part of the assert equal. Put a comma after the closing parentheses. And my expectation in quotes on the next line is quotes succeeded. The terminal shows assertion error. Failed is not equal to succeeded because an exception handler returns failed every time it is called. Since I wanted to process the input, enter before return failed, add return argument. That way I get the input back. The terminal shows assertion error for both tests. Test catch and failure is now failing. I get function raise exception at this address in memory, which is not equal to failed, because it just returns raise exception when it is called. In test catch and success, I get none is not equal to succeeded. It's just returning does not raise exception. I'll come down here to the input, hit F2 on argument. I want to change it to a more descriptive name, a underscore function. Enter to accept the change. And then come down to the return statement, parentheses at the end. I want the result of calling the function, not just the function name and address. The terminal shows exception boom for test catch and failure because the result of calling it is that. In test catch and success, I get type error. Non-type object is not callable. The result of calling does not raise exception, which is none as a function, is type error. To fix that, I'll make does not raise exception a function. DEF does not raise exception, parentheses, colon, enter, return, remove the equal sign, none. Test catch and success now shows assertion error, none is not equal to succeeded. Come down here to the exception handler, enter before return, try, colon. Remove the return from the statement, hit tab on the next line. Enter at the end of the line, backspace, except exception, colon. Come down to the next line, move it to the right. And test catch and failure passes. Test catch and success shows assertion error, none is not equal to succeeded. I'll come back here to the try statement, enter after the return, add else, colon. Enter return none. Still the same error. When I change none to quote succeeded, the terminal shows passing tests. What this does is it will run the code in the try block. If it encounters the exception in the except block, it will run the code in that block. If it does not encounter the exception in the except block, it will run the code in the else block and continue to run the program. I can be more specific with the exception in the except block if I do except module not found error, for example. The terminal shows exception boom because this is not module not found error. This try statement will only catch this exception or its children. I will undo that change to go back to exception and the test passes. Since all tests are passing, I will close out the terminal. I ran tests to show how to cause exceptions, how to handle them in tests and programs. Would you like to test measuring sleep duration? I will see you in the next one.